A car stalled in the middle of a night drenched in relentless rain, a choice that seemed impossible. That woman, a single mother fighting against accusations she no longer had the strength to battle, was driving home after her third consecutive night shift. Her body shattered, her eyes burning from exhaustion and tears she refused to let fall. Every dollar she earned went toward keeping her 5-year-old daughter alive, a little girl with a failing heart who needed surgery that cost more than Elena would make in 10 years. The road ahead blurred behind the curtain of rain, reflecting the chaos that was swallowing her life a little more each day. Her own mother had died 8 months ago, leaving behind nothing but $200,000 in medical debt, and a final whisper that echoed in Elena's mind every sleepless night. Kindness is never wasted, my dear. It always finds its way back. And then in the darkness, she saw him. A stranger slumped over the steering wheel of a black luxury car, blood seeping through his shirt, rain hammering against the windows as if trying to shatter them. He was wounded, unconscious, completely alone on that desolate stretch of highway outside Boston. She could have driven past. She should have driven past. She had every reason to turn away, to pretend she did not see, to rush home to her sick daughter waiting with a fever. But she stopped, and she could never have known that this small act of kindness would become the most dangerous, yet the most miraculous decision of her life. Because the man she saved that night was not just any stranger. He was Dominic Rossi, the most powerful and feared Mafia boss in all of Boston. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching this story from? Leave a comment below. If this story touches your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss what happens next. Now, what truly awaited her on that stormy night? Do you think she should have stopped or kept driving? The windshield wipers swayed back and forth in a steady rhythm, and inside the narrow, aging shell of the car, Elena let her mind drift back to the long sleepless nights. 12 hours. Each shift stretched for 12 hours. Her feet planted until they went numb, until she felt nothing but the dull ache creeping from her heels up into her lower back. Patients screamed for pain medication. Doctors barked at her for not moving fast enough, and the head nurse watched her with thinly veiled suspicion ever since the day she was accused. Yet Elena clenched her teeth and endured, kept her head down and worked, swallowed her tears because she did not have the right to fall apart. Not now, not when Lily still needed her. In her mind, numbers danced like a silent sentence. $750 for rent, $300 a month for Lily's heart medication, $200 for electricity and water, $150 still owed to the lawyer, and so much more. Unpaid bills piled on the kitchen table she was afraid to open, debt collectors calling that she was too afraid to answer. She had calculated it hundreds of times, twisted herself into hundreds of solutions, yet the numbers remained a spiraling trap with no exit, dragging her deeper every day. Lily's face rose in her mind, painfully vivid. The night before, just before Elena left for work, the little girl had tugged at her sleeve, wide eyes lifted with a sadness no 5-year-old should ever have to carry. "Mommy, why don't you sleep with me anymore?" Her voice had been small, trembling as if afraid of rejection. Elena had knelt down, pulled her daughter close, forcing her own voice not to shake. "Mommy has to work to buy your medicine, my little angel. When you get better, Mommy will sleep with you every night, I promise." Lily had not cried. She had only nodded, as if already too accustomed to watching her mother leave. And that silent acceptance cut deeper into Elena's heart than any accusation ever could. On the kitchen wall of their tiny apartment, the calendar hung motionless, one date circled in red ink. 2 weeks. Only 2 weeks until the court hearing. 14 days for Elena to prove her innocence. 14 days to keep her daughter by her side. 14 days before everything could collapse completely. If she lost, she would face a sentence of 3 to 7 years in prison. 7 years. Lily would be 12 by the time Elena was released. The child would grow up without her mother, walk through childhood alone, learn to tie her shoes, do her homework, and face her fears on stormy nights by herself. And worse than that, if Elena went to prison, Lily would belong to Derek. Derek, the man who had once beaten Elena until her ribs cracked. Derek, the man she had fled from in the middle of the night with her child in her arms. Derek, who had never loved Lily for a single day of her life. The thought of her daughter falling into his hands stole Elena's breath, made her want to scream into the rain that was pouring down like a waterfall. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, forcing the fear out of her mind, forcing herself to focus on the road ahead. She was not allowed to break. She was not allowed to give up. For Lily, she had to be strong. For her daughter, She had to survive this storm. But at that very moment, in the heart of the night and the rain that seemed determined to drown everything, her car began to make unfamiliar sounds, and Elena knew that tonight, fate was not going to let her go so easily. The groaning of the engine pulled Elena back into memories from 8 months earlier, when she had also been sitting alone in darkness like this, listening to sounds that signaled an ending, though back then it was not the dying breath of a car but the steady hiss of a ventilator beside her mother's hospital bed, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, and the heavy silence of a room waiting for death to arrive. Her mother lay there, her frail body swallowed by white sheets, tubes and IV lines tangled around her thin arms, as if trying to keep her tethered to this world a little longer. End-stage lung cancer. From the moment it was discovered to the moment the doctors shook their heads and said there was nothing more to be done. Only 6 months had passed. 6 months for Elena to watch her mother fade day by day. 6 months to understand that there were things money could never buy, no matter how hard she worked or how completely she exhausted herself. Elena had tried. God knew she had tried with everything she had. She took extra shifts, begged for overtime, sold the car she had bought only 2 years earlier to pay hospital bills. She lived on instant noodles for months, wore the same worn clothes again and again, cut away every expense she possibly could. But the numbers on the hospital invoices kept rising without mercy like a greedy beast that could never be satisfied. Chemotherapy, radiation, special medications, hospital rooms, specialist doctors. Every day her mother stayed alive meant thousands of dollars added to the debt, and when her mother finally took her last breath, she left Elena not only the ache of loss but also $200,000 in medical debt, a crushing weight on her chest that stole her breath every time she thought about it. On the final night, Elena sat beside the bed, holding her mother's thin hand as it grew colder with each passing hour. Her mother opened her eyes, once bright and now clouded by illness and morphine, yet still strong enough to look at her daughter with the full love of a lifetime. Elena bent down, tears streaming, straining to catch every fragile whisper. "My child, I am sorry for leaving you this burden." Her mother's voice was barely more than breath, so faint Elena had to press close to hear it. "But remember this. Kindness is never wasted, my child. It always finds its way back. No matter how hard life becomes, never let it turn you into someone cold." Elena nodded through choking tears. "I promise, Mom. I will take good care of Lily. I will be strong. I will never give up." Her mother smiled, peaceful, as if she had finally set down her last weight. Then she closed her eyes and never opened them again. At 3 a.m, the heart monitor released a long, flat sound that marked the end. Elena wanted to scream, to collapse, to let grief tear her apart piece by piece. But she could not. At 6 a.m, her shift would begin. The bills were still waiting. Lily still needed her medicine. Life kept moving even though her heart had shattered. She stood, kissed her mother's forehead one last time, and walked out of the hospital room with dry eyes and a hollow chest. She could not cry. She did not have time to cry. And now, 8 months later, in the middle of the rain screaming outside, her mother's voice rose again in Elena's mind like a small light in the darkness. "Kindness is never wasted, my child. It always finds its way back." Elena drew a deep breath, forcing herself to steady. She was not allowed to give up. Not today, not ever. For her mother, for Lily, for the promise she had sworn on that final night beside the hospital bed. Her mother's words still echoed in Elena's mind as she remembered the day her life truly began to collapse. 2 weeks earlier, on an afternoon as gray and heavy as lead, she received a message from Human Resources ordering her to report to the hospital director immediately. Elena did not think much of it. She was in the middle of a shift, had just finished changing the bandages of an elderly patient, her hands still carrying the sharp scent of antiseptic. She walked down the long corridor, her footsteps echoing against the polished tiles, unaware that each step was carrying her closer to the edge of an abyss. Dr. Richard Lawson's office sat on the top floor of the hospital, a place flooded with light from towering glass windows where everything radiated power and prestige. He sat behind an expensive oak desk, his fingers laced together, his eyes icy as he watched Elena enter. Beside him stood the head of Human Resources, and a man in a black suit, whom Elena would later learn was the hospital's lawyer. No one invited her to sit. "Miss Martinez," Lawson began, his voice cold and decisive, like a verdict already written. "We have evidence that you have been stealing opioid medications from the hospital pharmacy over the past 3 months. Elena froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, as if her throat had been suddenly crushed. Lawson gestured, and the head of Human Resources turned on a screen. "These are images from the security cameras," Lawson said, his voice utterly without emotion. On the screen, Elena saw herself, or someone who looked exactly like her, entering the drug storage room at 2 a.m, removing boxes of medication and slipping them into a bag. She wanted to scream that it was not her, that she had never done this, but Lawson continued. "This is the inventory log with your signature confirming receipt of the drugs, and this is an email sent from your account to an external buyer, negotiating prices." Elena stared at the evidence, her head spinning. The signature matched hers down to every stroke. The email came from an address bearing her name, yet she knew with absolute certainty that she had done none of it. Someone had framed her. Someone had constructed everything with terrifying precision. "I did not do this," Elena said, her voice trembling though she fought to keep it steady. "I swear to you, I have never stolen anything. This is a mistake." Lawson looked at her, and in that moment Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Not doubt, not the outrage of a man betrayed, but the calculated coldness of someone who already knew the outcome, who had arranged everything. "Evidence does not lie, Miss Martinez," Lawson replied, his voice sharp as a blade. "You are suspended, effective immediately, without pay. This matter will be turned over to the police, and you will face criminal charges. You may go." 3 days later, Elena met James Crawford, the court-appointed attorney assigned to her case. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes, the sort of person Elena felt she could trust. But even the gentleness in his voice could not ease the fear tightening around her heart. "I will be honest with you, Elena," Crawford sighed, gathering the papers on his desk. "The evidence is very unfavorable. Everything points in one direction, and Lawson has the best legal team in Boston. They will not back down if you fight this." "And what about me?" Elena asked, her voice on the verge of breaking. Crawford looked at her, his eyes filled with sympathy and helplessness. "If you lose, you are facing a sentence of 3 to 7 years in prison for theft of hospital property and illegal drug distribution. I will do everything I can, but you need to prepare for the worst." That night, Elena returned home in a daze. Lily ran to her, small arms wrapping tightly around her mother's legs, babbling excitedly about her day at Mrs. Sarah's house. Elena knelt down and pulled her daughter into her arms, and for the first time in months, she cried. She cried without sound, swallowing each sob, burying her face in the warm, milk-scented hair of her child, so Lily would not see her tears. Her daughter did not need to know the world was falling apart. She only needed to know that her mother was still here, still loved her, and would fight for her until her very last breath. But fate did not seem ready to release Elena. Just 1 week after she was suspended from work, while the pain of the false accusation was still raw, another blow struck like lightning from a clear sky. That morning, as Elena was feeding Lily breakfast, there was a knock at the door, and when she opened it, a man in a gray suit handed her a brown envelope and walked away without a word. A court summons. Derek Thompson, Lily Martinez's biological father, was petitioning for full custody. Elena read the words again and again, her hands shaking so badly the paper slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Derek. The name twisted like a dull blade in an old wound, dragging her back into memories she had tried to bury for 3 years. 3 years of marriage to Derek Thompson had been 3 years of living hell. Elena met him when she was 20, young, naive, still believing in love and sweet promises. Back then, Derek was charming, generous, always knowing how to make her feel like the most important woman in the world. They married after 6 months of dating, and Elena thought she had found happiness, but Derek's true face revealed itself the night after their wedding. The first time he hit her was over a cold meal. Elena came home late from work and had not had time to cook, and Derek slapped her to the kitchen floor. He apologized immediately afterward, cried, knelt, swore he would never do it again. And Elena, foolish and in love, forgave him. It was the greatest mistake of her life. The beatings grew more frequent, more brutal. Derek hit her for speaking to a male coworker. Derek hit her for wearing a skirt he thought was too short. Derek hit her because the food was slightly salty, because the house was not clean enough, because she dared to look at him the wrong way. Each time he apologized, each time he promised to change, and each time Elena believed him, until she became pregnant with Lily. She thought the child would change everything, that Derek would become a good father, a good husband. She was wrong. On the final night, Lily was only 2 years old. Derek came home drunk, his eyes bloodshot, the stench of alcohol thick on his breath. He beat Elena because she forgot to buy beer, kicked and punched her until she curled on the floor, blood streaming from her nose and mouth, ribs cracking under his blows. And when he lifted his foot to strike again, Lily ran out of the bedroom, screaming and crying for her mother. Derek turned toward the child with madness in his eyes, and in that moment Elena knew that if she did not run, he would kill them both. She does not remember where she found the strength to stand. She only remembers grabbing Lily and running into the freezing night, barefoot, without a coat, with nothing but her trembling child in her arms. She ran to the police station, filed for divorce, and never looked back. For 3 years, Elena believed she had escaped Derek, that he had vanished from their lives. But now he was back, wearing an expensive suit, a practiced smile, surrounded by lawyers and a carefully calculated plan. At the mediation hearing, Derek sat across from her, looking like a successful businessman rather than the abuser she had known. His lawyer spoke smoothly. "My client has stable employment with a high income, owns a suitable home, and has the financial means to care for his daughter. Meanwhile, the defendant is facing serious criminal charges and may be sentenced to several years in prison. For the best interests of the child, custody should be granted to the father." Elena looked at Derek, and he met her gaze with a look of triumph. In that moment, she understood the truth. Derek did not care about Lily. He never had. What he wanted was the child's health insurance, the monthly benefits, the power to control and punish Elena for daring to escape him. And if Lily fell into his hands, the little girl would never receive her heart surgery. Her daughter would die. That night, Elena sat beside Lily's bed, watching her sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling weakly. She clasped her daughter's hand, and in the darkness, she swore to herself that no matter the cost, no matter if she had to stand alone against the entire world, she would never let Derek touch her daughter. Never. And tonight, the night Elena was sitting in her stalled car in the middle of a rainstorm that poured down like a deluge, was the very night that oath was tested to its absolute limit. Everything began at 2 a.m, when Elena had just finished her 3rd consecutive shift at the hospital. Even though she had been suspended from Boston General, she still had to work, still had to earn money. So she had taken a temporary position at a small clinic on the outskirts of the city, a place that asked few questions and paid in cash. The work was exhausting, the pay meager, but Elena had no right to be selective. She had just changed out of her nurse's uniform and was about to leave when her phone vibrated. A message from Mrs. Sarah, the kind-hearted neighbor who watched Lily whenever Elena worked the night shift. Lily had a high fever. She was crying for her mother. Elena felt her heart constrict painfully in her chest. She ran to the parking lot, her steps unsteady on the soaked pavement, as rain began to fall as if the sky itself were breaking apart. Her 15-year-old Honda Civic was parked in the far corner, its faded paint peeling in patches, its door creaking every time it opened. She had bought it for $800 after selling her previous car to pay her mother's hospital bills, and since then it had been her only way to get to work each day. Elena turned the key. The engine groaned for a moment, then came to life. She let out a breath of relief and pressed the accelerator, speeding out of the lot. The rain grew heavier by the second, the windshield wipers struggling helplessly against the torrent beating down on the glass. The suburban Boston highway was deserted at midnight, her headlights the only thing slicing through the pitch-black darkness. Elena pushed the gas harder, her mind fixed solely on Lily, burning with fever, crying, calling for her mother. But after only about 10 minutes, the engine began to make strange sounds, like the wheezing cough of someone on the verge of death. "No, no, no, please do not do this," Elena whispered, her hands clenching the steering wheel. But her plea went unanswered. The car jerked violently, then died completely in the middle of the road, left stranded like a metal corpse in the storm. Elena tried to restart it. Once, twice, 3 times, but the engine only gave a weak, broken sound before falling silent. She slammed her hand against the steering wheel, tears spilling down her face and mixing with the cold sweat on her skin. Her phone, she needed to call for help, but when she turned on the screen, it flickered once and went dark. Dead battery. Elena sat motionless in the car as rain pounded the roof like thousands of fists crashing down on her all at once. She had no money for roadside assistance, no phone to call anyone, no one to turn to. Lily was at home with a fever, alone with elderly Mrs. Sarah, and Elena was trapped here, helpless, useless, unable to do anything for her child. Is this the end? She wondered, the voice in her head exhausted and hollow with despair. She had fought. She had struggled. She had braced herself against everything life had thrown at her. But she was only a woman of flesh and bone, and even the strongest eventually reached a point where they wanted to let go. She closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely, no longer having the strength to hold them back. Then, Through the howling rain, something made her open her eyes. A faint light, about 50 meters ahead of her. Headlights from another car, weak as a candle in the wind. Elena squinted through the curtain of rain. A sleek black luxury vehicle sat on the shoulder, the kind she had only ever seen in movies or magazines. But something was wrong. There were no hazard lights, the door was slightly open, and there was no sign that anyone was seeking help. The nurse's instinct inside Elena rose up, stronger than the despair crushing her shoulders. Someone was hurt. She did not know why she was so certain, but she was. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, that final piece of guidance, like a lamp lighting the way. Kindness is never wasted, my child. Elena drew a deep breath, then pushed open her car door and stepped out. The rain slammed into her like a wall of ice water, biting to the bone, but she did not stop. She ran toward the unfamiliar car, bare feet slipping on the wet road, her heart pounding violently in her chest. And when she reached it, when she looked through the window, she saw him, a man slumped over the steering wheel, blood soaking into his white dress shirt, rain blowing through the open door and striking his body as if trying to wash away the last fragile remnants of life he had left. Elena did not have time to think. She did not have time to be afraid, to hesitate, to wonder whether she should involve herself in this at all. 5 years as a nurse had turned saving lives into an instinct etched into her blood and bone, and in this moment that instinct took complete control. She yanked the car door wider open, leaned inside, and placed 2 fingers against the stranger's neck to check his pulse. Alive, faint, fragile, but still there. He was breathing, but the breaths were shallow and rapid, like someone slowly slipping into an abyss. Elena scanned him quickly, assessing the situation the way she had done hundreds of times in emergency rooms. Blood. So much blood, dark red, soaking nearly the entire chest and left shoulder of his expensive white dress shirt. She gently pulled the fabric aside, and her heart skipped a beat at what she saw. A small, deep, circular wound in his left shoulder, the kind she had seen too many times during overnight shifts at Boston General. A gunshot wound. A part of Elena screamed that she should run, that anyone shot in the middle of the night on an empty road could not be innocent, that she was putting herself in danger. But the stronger part, the part her mother had shaped for 27 years, the part the Hippocratic oath had carved into her soul, would not let her turn away. A life was fading in front of her, and she was a nurse. She did not have the right to let him die. Elena tore off her thin jacket, the only thing shielding her from the freezing rain, folded it into a thick pad, and pressed it firmly against the wound. Pressure. Stop the bleeding. That was what mattered most. Blood soaked through the fabric, hot and slick, seeping between her fingers. The rain kept pouring, icy and relentless, but Elena felt nothing except the weak pulse beneath her palm. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called, forcing calm into her voice while her heart thundered wildly. "You need to stay awake. Can you hear me?" There was no response. The man lay motionless, his head tilted to one side, dark hair plastered wetly against his forehead. His face was sharp and hard, the face of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than receiving them. Even unconscious, he radiated a quiet authority that made others wary. But Elena had no time to dwell on that. She kept pressing, kept calling to him, kept praying silently that someone would pass by, that help would come. 10 minutes passed, maybe more, she no longer knew. Time lost meaning when she was wrestling with death itself. Her hands had gone numb from the cold, her jacket was soaked with blood, but she did not dare let go. Then the man groaned. Elena nearly sobbed with relief. He stirred, his head shifting slightly, then slowly his eyes opened. Dark gray eyes, like a storm-laden sky, sharp and piercing, locked onto her. Even clouded by pain and blood loss, those eyes held something that made Elena catch her breath. Not fear, not threat, but disbelief, as if he could not comprehend that someone was trying to save him. "Do not move," Elena said quickly, her professional nurse's voice snapping back into place even as her heart pounded like a war drum. "You have a serious shoulder wound. I am stopping the bleeding. I am a nurse. You need to stay still." The man did not speak. He only watched her, her face soaked with rain and tears, her hands pressed firmly to his wound, her eyes resolute and unwilling to surrender. Then he gave a slight nod, a small gesture that carried something Elena could not name. And in that moment, amid the screaming rain and flowing blood, the fates of 2 strangers began to intertwine in ways neither of them could possibly have imagined. The man tried to say something, but his voice emerged only as a hoarse whisper. Elena leaned closer, pressing her ear near his lips to hear him. "Jacket pocket," Phone. His voice was weak, yet it still carried a strange authority. As if even balanced on the line between life and death, he remained a man accustomed to giving orders. Elena hesitated for a second, then slipped her hand into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out an expensive phone. The screen lit up without a password. "Call the first number," he said, his eyes already starting to glaze again as if he were about to lose consciousness once more. "Say it is Dominic. They will come." Elena did not ask who Dominic was, did not ask why he had been shot, did not ask who would come. She simply followed his instruction and dialed the first contact in the list. A low male voice answered after the first ring, cautious and alert. "Boss." Elena swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I found a man named Dominic on Charles River Parkway, about 2 miles south of the Riverside intersection. He has a severe shoulder wound and has lost a lot of blood. He needs emergency help immediately." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then the voice turned sharp and urgent. "Keep him alive. We will be there in 15 minutes. The call ended. Elena set the phone aside and pressed harder on the wound. Dominic looked at her, his gray eyes slowly regaining a hint of focus. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough like stones grinding together. "Why did you stop?" The question caught Elena off guard. She did not know how to answer, because she herself was not entirely sure why she had stopped. She had every reason to drive on. Her daughter was at home with a fever. Her car was broken. She was exhausted. She was facing prison and the loss of her child. She had 1,000 reasons not to involve herself in someone else's trouble, but she had stopped. "I am a nurse," Elena finally said, her voice as soft as breath. "And you needed help." The man studied her for a long moment, his dark gray eyes searching her face as if trying to read her, to uncover some hidden motive behind her actions. But he found nothing except sincerity and exhaustion in her gaze. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone easing slightly. "Elena," she replied. "Elena Martinez." Dominic gave a faint nod, as if committing the name to memory. Then he said, slowly and clearly despite his weakening breath, "I will not forget what I owe you, Elena Martinez." Before Elena could respond, blinding headlights tore through the darkness. 2 black SUVs roared in at terrifying speed and screeched to a halt beside them. Doors flew open, and a tall Asian man rushed forward, his face cold as ice but his eyes flashing with alarm when he saw Dominic covered in blood. "Boss, Marcus," Dominic called the man's name, his voice weak yet still commanding. "Take her home. Fix her car. Do not ask questions." Marcus looked at Elena, his gaze assessing her in a single sharp glance, then nodded. Others were already lifting Dominic onto a stretcher and into the vehicle. Elena stood there, her hands still slick with blood, her clothes soaked through, shivering from cold and from everything that had just happened. "I do not need," she shook her head, trying to refuse. "My daughter is sick at home. I need to get back immediately." "That is exactly why I will take you home," Marcus said, his voice allowing no argument. "That is the boss's order, and he always keeps his word." Elena wanted to protest, but she was too tired, too cold, too drained to argue. She nodded and let Marcus guide her into one of the SUVs. The vehicle sped off into the rainy night, and Elena turned her head to look back at the place where everything had just unfolded. She did not know who the man named Dominic was. She did not know why he had been shot, why men dressed in black had come for him so swiftly, why he had looked at her as if she had done something unimaginable. She only knew that tonight, in the heart of the storm, she had saved a life, and that was enough. Or at least, that was what she told herself. 3 days after that storm-torn night, inside a grand villa hidden among ancient oak trees on the outskirts of Boston, Dominic Rossi sat in his private study, his left shoulder tightly bandaged beneath a black dress shirt, dark gray eyes fixed on the wide glass window before him. The rain had long since stopped, yet the sky remained overcast, mirroring his mood. The wound in his shoulder still throbbed, but it was not the pain that occupied his thoughts. What haunted him was the woman's eyes from that night. Eyes worn down by exhaustion yet unyielding, eyes that did not flinch at the sight of blood, eyes belonging to someone who would save a stranger in the middle of a violent storm without asking a single question. Dominic Rossi was no stranger to death. He was born in blood, raised in shadow, and had risen to the pinnacle of Boston's underworld through a ruthlessness few could rival. The Rossi empire had been built from nothing by his father Vincent Rossi more than 40 years earlier, and Dominic inherited it at the age of 24, when the old man chose to step into the background. 12 years. 12 years Dominic had held everything men dreamed of in his hands: money, power, fear. The The Rossi empire stretched from lavish casinos in the heart of the city to real estate holdings worth hundreds of millions of dollars, from shipping fleets that controlled the harbor to operations no one dared speak of in daylight. In Boston, the name Rossi meant absolute power, and Dominic was its living embodiment. Yet contrary to rumor, Dominic was not a monster without principles. His father had taught him from childhood that even in darkness there must be rules, and Dominic lived by those rules as by a sacred oath. Never touch women or children, never traffic drugs near schools, and never ever betray someone who has helped you. These were the 3 unbreakable laws of the Rossi family, laws Dominic had carved into his very bones. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Marcus Chen entered, his expression as cold as ever, though his eyes flickered briefly with concern as they landed on Dominic's injured shoulder. Marcus had followed Dominic since he was 20, his right hand, the only man Dominic trusted completely in a world filled with knives aimed at the back. "We captured one of the men from the ambush that night," Marcus reported evenly. "He confessed he works for O'Brien. It seems the old man thought this was the right moment to strike." Dominic was not surprised. Sean O'Brien, the Irish mob boss controlling southern Boston, had been eyeing Rossi territory for years. The ambush was merely the opening move in a takeover plan long in the making. "Deal with him," Dominic said, his voice cold and empty of emotion, "and send a message to O'Brien. Tell him that if he wants a war, I will give him a war, but he should remember that the last man who dared challenge the Rossi family is now lying 3 meters underground." Marcus nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "And the woman from that night? Elena Martinez. What would you like me to do about her?" Dominic was silent for a moment, his gray eyes distant. "Nothing yet. Just make sure her car was repaired and that she made it home safely." Marcus nodded once more and left, closing the door behind him. When the room fell quiet again, Dominic stood and walked to the painting on the wall opposite his desk. It depicted a young woman with long black hair and a radiant smile, eyes sparkling with a joy untouched by the darkness of this world. Isabella, his sister. 10 years had passed since she was gone. 10 years Dominic had lived with a wound in his chest that never healed. 10 years he had asked himself every night whether there had been something he could have done to save her. And for 10 years, he had found no answer. Dominic reached out and gently touched the frame, his fingers brushing his sister's painted face as if trying to reclaim a warmth long lost. "I will find you, Bella," he whispered, his voice breaking with an emotion he never allowed anyone to see. "I will find a way to atone, even if it takes the rest of my life." 10 years earlier, Isabella Rossi was only 23 years old, the most beautiful young woman Dominic had ever known, not because of her appearance alone, undeniable as it was, but because she carried within her a kind of light that the darkness of the Rossi family's world could never touch. Isabella believed in love, believed in the goodness of people, believed that everything could change if one loved deeply enough. She was the only pure thing in Dominic's life, the only reason he still believed there was something left in him that could be called humanity. And then Thomas Webb appeared. He was a young businessman, handsome and charming, from a prestigious family in the suburbs of Boston. He courted Isabella with flowers and poetry, with romantic dates and promises of a happy future. Dominic disliked him from the very first glance. There was something in Thomas's eyes that unsettled him, something hidden behind that flawless smile, like a snake lying motionless beneath green grass waiting for its prey. But Isabella loved him blindly, and Dominic could never refuse his sister anything. The wedding was held in the spring, white flowers blooming everywhere, Isabella radiant in her wedding dress like a true angel. Dominic watched her walk down the aisle, his heart heavy with dark premonitions he forced himself to dismiss. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe Thomas truly loved his sister. Maybe happiness could exist in this world. He was wrong. 6 months after the wedding, Dominic's phone rang at 2 a.m. He answered, and Isabella's sobs shattered like glass in his ear. "Brother, I am scared." Her voice trembled, broken, nothing like the vibrant young woman she had once been. Thomas hit me." Dominic could not remember how fast he drove to his sister's house. He only remembered the moment the door opened, and he saw Isabella standing there with a bruised face, swollen lips, one eye so darkened it could not open. Rage erupted inside Dominic like a volcano. He wanted to find Thomas, tear him apart piece by piece, make him suffer 1,000 times more than what he had done to his sister. But Isabella clutched his hand, her eyes filled with tears, pleading, "Do not, brother. I love him. He promised he will change. He was just drunk. He did not mean it. Please, do not hurt him." And Dominic listened. It was the decision he would regret most in his life, a decision he would carry to the grave like an unforgivable curse. 3 months later, the hospital called. Thomas had beaten Isabella to death. When Dominic arrived, his sister lay motionless on the hospital bed, her body covered in bruises and broken bones, the ventilator hissing steadily like a countdown to death. The doctors said there was no hope, that her brain was gone, that they were only waiting for the family to say goodbye. Dominic sat beside her, holding her icy hand, and for the first time in his life, the most ruthless mafia boss in Boston cried like a child. He did not get to say goodbye. He did not get to hear her laugh one last time. He did not get to tell her how much he loved her. Isabella left in silence, taking with her the last light in Dominic's life. That night, Dominic found Thomas trying to flee the city. He did not call his men, did not use a gun, did not end it quickly. He used his own hands, slowly, deliberately, painfully. He wanted Thomas to feel every second, the way Isabella had felt them. And when Thomas finally stopped breathing, Dominic stood there, his hands soaked in blood, his soul in ruins. From that night on, Dominic Rossi became someone else. He swore that no abuser would ever escape punishment again. The weak would be protected, and anyone who dared lay a hand on women or children would pay the price. No exceptions, no forgiveness. Never. 2 days after standing before Isabella's portrait, Dominic summoned Marcus into his study, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass and carving sharp lines across the angular face of the mafia boss seated behind his desk. Yet his gray eyes remained as dark as a moonless night. "Find out everything about the woman from that night," Dominic said, his voice steady but carrying something Marcus had never heard in the 16 years he had followed his boss. "Elena Martinez. I want to know everything about her." Marcus stood still for a second, unable to hide the flicker of surprise on his usually icy face, because in all the years he had served Dominic Rossi, he had never seen his boss take an interest in anyone like this. Dominic could have any woman he wanted, but he never remembered their names, never asked about their lives, never spared them a second thought once they left his bed. Yet this woman, the one who had been soaked and shivering while pressing her hands to his wound in the middle of a violent storm, had clearly left behind something that could not be erased. 2 days later, Marcus returned with a thick file, placed it on Dominic's desk, and stepped back in silence. Dominic opened the folder, and each page turned felt like another layer being peeled away, revealing the painful story of a woman he had met only once. Elena Martinez, 27 years old, nurse at Boston General Hospital for 5 years, mother deceased from cancer 8 months earlier, leaving behind $200,000 in medical debt. 5-year-old daughter, Lily Martinez, born with a severe congenital heart condition, requiring surgery within 6 months at a cost of $150,000. Falsely accused of stealing opioid medications, currently facing a prison sentence of 3 to 7 years. Ex-husband Derek Thompson with a documented history of domestic abuse, currently filing for full custody of the child. Dominic read slowly, line by line, and with every word, the anger in his chest burned hotter. "She was framed," Dominic said, his voice hard as steel while his eyes blazed. "This evidence is clearly fabricated. Security footage can be altered, signatures forged, emails hacked. Who is behind it?" "Dr. Richard Lawson," Marcus replied, "the hospital director. We dug deeper and discovered he is involved in an opioid distribution ring feeding the black market. The drugs reported missing were actually moved by Lawson himself, but he needed a scapegoat to cover his tracks. Elena Martinez was the perfect target. Poor, alone, unprotected, drowning in debt and desperation. No one would believe her word against a hospital director." Dominic rose from his chair and walked to the window, gazing out at the vast garden beyond. He thought of that night, of the woman who had stopped in the rain to save a stranger who was bleeding to death, who had not asked who he was, who had demanded nothing in return. She could have driven on. She had every reason not to stop. A sick child at home, a broken car, a dead phone, a life collapsing around her. Yet she stopped, pressed her hands to his wound until the bleeding slowed, and looked at him with eyes free of fear or expectation. "She saved a stranger in the storm, and this is how the world repays her," Dominic said, his voice dropping, a storm forming beneath the calm. "A good woman, a mother trying to keep her child alive, and they want to throw her in prison to hide their crimes." He turned back to Marcus, and in those gray eyes Marcus saw something he had not seen since Isabella died. Not Dominic's usual cold ruthlessness, but the fire of rage at injustice, the fire of a man willing to burn the world down to protect what is right. "Dig deeper into Lawson," Dominic ordered. "I want everything, every dirty deal, every partner he has ever worked with. And look into Derek Thompson. I want to know why he suddenly wants custody of a child he never cared about." Marcus nodded and turned to leave, but just before he reached the door, Dominic's voice stopped him. "She is not to know anything about this. Not yet." 1 week after that fateful night, Elena brought Lily to Boston Children's Hospital for her routine cardiac checkup, an appointment she had dreaded for days because every visit meant facing terrifying numbers on medical bills and the doctor's sympathetic looks when they spoke about Lily's condition. Elena had barely slept the night before, partly because of a late shift at the temporary clinic, partly because thoughts of the upcoming trial kept spinning relentlessly in her mind. The hospital was as crowded as ever, the corridors filled with the cries of children, the murmured reassurances of parents, and the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses. Elena sat on a row of waiting chairs with Lily beside her, the little girl's small legs swinging above the floor, her wide eyes taking in everything around her, with the endless curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Mommy, why are there so many babies crying here?" Lily asked, her voice as clear as wind chimes, and before Elena could answer, she continued, "Mommy, why do doctors wear white? Mommy, can I have ice cream after the checkup, Mommy? Are you tired? Your eyes are very red." Elena smiled, pulled her daughter into her arms, and kissed her soft hair that smelled faintly of children's shampoo. "Mommy is fine, my little angel. I am just a bit sleepy." Lily studied her mother with eyes older than her years, as if she understood more than a child her age should, then wrapped her arms around Elena's neck and whispered, "It is okay, Mommy. I will protect you." Elena's heart clenched with love and pain as she hugged her tightly, swallowing the tears threatening to rise. "Lily Martinez," a nurse called out, and Elena stood, taking her daughter's hand and following her. But instead of leading them to the cardiology office as usual, the nurse turned down a different hallway. "Ms. Martinez, the doctor asked me to take you to a conference room first. There is a hospital donor who would like to meet you." Elena was startled, confused by what was happening. A donor? Why would someone like that want to meet her? A poor single mother with a child who had a heart condition, but she had no chance to ask, because the nurse stopped at a wooden door and gestured for her to enter. The meeting room was small yet elegant, sunlight pouring in through a large window overlooking the hospital garden, and standing by that window with his back to her was a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit. When the door closed behind Elena, the man turned around, and she froze as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over her head. Gray eyes, a sharply defined face, the same penetrating gaze she had seen 1 week earlier in the storm, when he lay bleeding over his steering wheel while she pressed her hands to his wound to stop the bleeding. It was the man she had saved. "Hello, Elena," he said, his voice low and warm yet carrying an authority that made the air in the room feel heavier. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She did not know what to say or how to react. Why was he here? How had he found her? What did he want? She stammered, her hand tightening around Lily's as the little girl stood beside her. "You are." "I am Nick," he said, stepping toward her with movements that were confident and controlled. "A businessman. I fund this hospital's pediatric heart surgery program. I heard about your daughter's case and wanted to meet you personally." He was lying. Elena knew that. This was not coincidence or chance. But before she could say anything, Lily stepped out from behind her, looking up at the tall man with wide eyes and no fear at all. "Are you a superhero?" Lily asked, her voice pure and innocent as she tilted her head and examined him from head to toe like a museum exhibit. "You wear black like Batman. Batman is a superhero. Are you a superhero?" And then something strange happened. The man Elena had seen bleeding with eyes cold as steel, the man who radiated danger and power in every line of his body, the man her instincts told her not to treat lightly, suddenly smiled, not a polite or practiced smile, but a real one that softened the hard lines of his face and lit his gray eyes with something Elena had never seen before. "I am not a superhero," Dominic said, his voice strangely gentle as he looked down at the little girl standing before him. "But I like Batman very much." Elena stood there watching her daughter talk to the mysterious man, and inside her, a strange feeling began to stir, part fear, part hope. Lily did not wait for Elena's permission. She stepped closer to Dominic, lifting her wide eyes to him, with the boundless curiosity of a 5-year-old who did not yet know what fear was. "Uncle Nick, do you have children?" she asked, tilting her head like a small sparrow, and Dominic paused slightly at the unexpected question, as Elena caught a fleeting shadow pass through his gray eyes so quickly. She was not sure she had truly seen it. "No, I do not have children," Dominic replied, his voice gentler than Elena had ever heard it. "Why not? Having children is fun, I am Mommy's child, and Mommy says I am her most precious gift. Do you not want a precious gift too? Elena moved to pull Lily back and apologize for her boldness, but Dominic had already crouched down to Lily's eye level, and the sight rooted Elena to the spot. Because what kind of man from his world knelt before a poor child like this? I have not found the right person to give that gift to yet, Dominic said, and there was a deep sadness in his voice that even Lily seemed to sense. Oh, so you are very lonely then? Lily asked, and without waiting for an answer, she continued. Do you have a dog? I really want a dog, but Mommy says our place is too small. Do you like ice cream? I like strawberry best. Do you know Princess Elsa? I like Elsa because she has magic that freezes everything. Dominic answered every question patiently, something even Marcus would not have believed without seeing it himself. I have a dog named Bruno. I like vanilla ice cream, and I have watched Frozen, but I like Anna more than Elsa. Elena stood there watching the strange conversation between her daughter and the mysterious man, seeing Dominic's gaze soften as he looked at Lily, seeing the hard lines of his face relax, seeing something like peace settle over him like a warm blanket. He looked at her child, not with the indulgence adults give children, but with genuine attention, as if every word Lily spoke mattered and deserved to be heard. Uncle Nick, wait for me a moment, Lily suddenly said, then turned to Elena. Mommy, can I borrow paper and my crayons? I want to draw Uncle Nick a picture. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the small notebook and box of crayons she always carried to keep Lily occupied while waiting. Lily sat down right on the floor without needing a table or chair, and began to draw with intense focus. 10 minutes passed in silence. Dominic straightened and stepped beside Elena, standing next to her watching Lily draw. She is very special, he said softly. His voice meant only for Elena. She is not afraid of strangers, Elena replied without looking at him. Sometimes that worries me. Trusting too easily can get her hurt. Or maybe, Dominic said slowly, that trust is the most precious thing this world is missing. Before Elena could respond, Lily jumped up and ran to Dominic with the drawing in her hands. Finished, she exclaimed proudly, holding it out to him. This is Uncle Batman saving Mommy. You are Batman. Mommy is the princess, and I am the little angel flying above. Dominic took the drawing and Elena saw his hand tremble slightly. It was a child's scribbled picture of a tall man, dressed in black, standing beside a long-haired woman, with a little girl with wings flying above them. And beneath it, Lily had written in clumsy but earnest letters, Uncle Batman saves Mommy. Dominic stared at it for a long moment. So long Elena began to worry. Then he folded it carefully as if it were an invaluable work of art, and slipped it into his breast pocket right over his heart. Thank you, Lily, he said, his voice strangely rough. This is the most beautiful picture I have ever received. And when he lifted his gaze to Elena, she saw those gray eyes glistening in the window light like the sky after rain. That night, as Boston drifted into sleep and streetlights flickered like fallen stars scattered across the ground, Dominic Rossi sat alone in his study, Lily's clumsy drawing laid out before him, and he stared at it for hours. At the uneven lines filled with affection, at the black-clad figure the little girl had called Batman, at the crooked words that read, Uncle Batman saves Mommy, and he wondered when the last time had been that anyone gave him a gift born purely from the heart, a memory he could barely reach. Perhaps Isabella long ago, when she had been 10 years old and still drew ugly little pictures for her big brother's birthday. Dominic lifted the phone and called Boston Children's Hospital, his voice calm and absolute as he made his request. I want to cover the entire cost of heart surgery for the patient Lily Martinez, every expense, including post-operative care and medication. There was a pause on the line before the financial officer spoke hesitantly. Sir, that is a very large amount. $150,000 not including potential additional costs. I will need to know who you are too. I want to remain anonymous, Dominic cut in, his tone allowing no argument. Just tell the family that an anonymous benefactor has covered everything. Do not disclose any information about me. I will transfer the funds within 24 hours. When the call ended, Marcus entered the room and placed another folder on the desk. What will you do next? He asked, unable to hide his curiosity. About Elena Martinez. Dominic looked up, his gray eyes sharp and cold. Find evidence against Lawson. She was framed and I will prove it. Hire the best private investigators. Bring in a full team of hackers if necessary. I want every dirty transaction Lawson has ever touched. Every call, every email, every secret meeting. Leave nothing uncovered. Marcus nodded but remained standing as if there was more to say. Dominic raised an eyebrow. What else? "We have preliminary findings on Lawson," Marcus said as he opened the folder. "He is running an opioid distribution operation through several intermediaries. The drugs Elena Martinez was accused of stealing were in fact moved by Lawson himself. He needed a scapegoat. Once health inspectors began asking questions. Why her? Dominic asked, even though he already knew the answer, because she was the perfect target. Marcus replied quietly. Poor, alone, drowning in debt, no money for strong legal counsel, no connections, no one to protect her, a single mother with a sick child, who would believe her word against a hospital director. Lawson knew she had no power to fight back. Dominic's hand clenched into a fist as a low burning fury took hold of his chest. "He will pay," he said, his voice like ice while his eyes burned. "Find more. I want enough to bury him." The next morning, in a cramped apartment in the South End, Elena was feeding Lily breakfast when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number from Boston Children's Hospital flashed on the screen, and her heart tightened as she answered, her mind bracing for bad news, for words telling her Lily's condition had worsened, that money was needed immediately, that time was running out. But the voice on the other end delivered something Elena had never dared to dream of. "Miss Martinez, I am calling with good news. An anonymous benefactor has covered the entire cost of your daughter's surgery, $150,000, including post-operative care. You may schedule Lily's procedure whenever you are ready." Elena dropped the phone. She stood frozen as if rooted to the floor, unable to believe what she had just heard. $150,000. Who? Who could do this, and why? "Mommy, why are you crying?" Lily asked anxiously. "Are you hurting, Mommy?" Elena fell to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms, tears pouring freely at last. "No, my love," she sobbed, her voice shaking with joy. "Mommy is not hurt. Mommy is happy, so happy. You will have your surgery. You will get better. You will be okay." As Lily hugged her back, not fully understanding but smiling because her mother was smiling, Elena's eyes drifted to the business card lying on the table, the card the man named Nick had given her before leaving the hospital the day before. It held only a name and a phone number and nothing else, and inside her, with every beat of her heart, a question quietly began to grow. But Elena's joy did not last long, because in the shadows there were eyes watching her that she knew nothing about. Derek Thompson sat inside a rented car parked across the street from Elena's apartment, his bitter gaze fixed on the third-floor window where warm yellow light spilled into the night. He had been watching her for 2 weeks now, ever since he filed for custody of Lily, documenting every move she made, every person she met, every place she went. At first Derek thought everything would be easy. Elena was about to go to prison. She had no money, no powerful lawyer, no one to protect her. All he had to do was wait and watch her collapse, and then Lily would belong to him, along with the medical insurance payout and child support money he had already begun to count on. But things had changed. Derek discovered that Elena had a benefactor, a mysterious man she had met at the Children's Hospital 2 days earlier. The private investigator he hired brought photographs showing Elena standing beside a tall man in a black suit inside a conference room, Lily sitting on the man's lap drawing, and the way Elena looked at him with something Derek could not tolerate. Who dared to touch what belonged to him? Derek ground his teeth and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Elena had dared to run, dared to divorce him, dared to take the child he considered his property, and now she dared to find another man. No, he would not let this stand. He would destroy her, take everything from her, make her regret ever defying him. The following day, Derek went to Dr. Richard Lawson's office at Boston General Hospital. He had investigated and knew Lawson was the one behind Elena's false accusation, and he saw opportunity there. 2 men with the same objective could always find common ground. "Mr. Thompson," Lawson said from behind his desk, studying Derek carefully. "I understand you wanted to speak with me about Elena Martinez." Derek smiled, the smile of a predator who had spotted wounded prey. "That's right. I am her ex-husband, and I have information that can help you in court." Lawson raised an eyebrow, signaling him to continue. "I can testify," Derek said coolly. "I can say that when we lived together I saw her bring medication home from the hospital, opioids, painkillers, all kinds of things. She said it was for her mother. But who knows what she was really doing with them." Lawson watched him for a long moment before a slow smile spread across his face. "That is a serious accusation. Mr. Thompson, are you certain you want to testify to this under oath?" "Absolutely," Derek replied, his eyes gleaming with malice. "As long as you help me with a small favor in return." "And what would that be?" "I need money, $50,000, to pay off some people I should never have owed." You help me and I help you bury that woman. We both win. Lawson nodded slowly, calculation flickering in his eyes. Very well. I will take care of it. Just make sure your testimony is convincing. But Derek was not finished. He still held another arrow, one he believed would finish Elena completely. The next day he filed a supplemental motion with the court, accusing Elena of maintaining an inappropriate relationship with a suspicious man, claiming she exposed her daughter to an unsafe environment, arguing that she lacked the moral fitness to be a mother. That afternoon, Elena's phone rang, and the worried voice of Attorney Crawford came through the line. Elena, I have bad news. Derek has filed an additional motion, and he has a new witness. He intends to testify against you in the drug theft case. And not only that, he is accusing you of involvement with a questionable man, claiming you are unfit to retain custody of your child. Elena collapsed into a chair, the phone nearly slipping from her hand. Everything was falling apart piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The joy over Lily's surgery suddenly meant nothing. If she could not stay with her daughter, if Lily were handed over to Derek, if everything she had fought for became meaningless. That night, Elena sat beside Lily's bed, watching her sleep beneath the soft glow of a nightlight, studying her angelic face, her lips slightly parted, her tiny chest rising and falling with each steady breath. Tears streamed endlessly down Elena's cheeks, dripping onto the hand she held tightly in hers. My love, I am sorry, she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. I do not know what to do anymore. I tried my best, but I am not strong enough. I am so sorry. Lily did not hear her. She slept peacefully in the dream world of childhood, unaware that beyond the door of this small bedroom, the darkness was closing in around them more tightly with every passing hour. At the same moment, Elena was crying beside her daughter's bed. Inside the Rossi estate, Dominic was reading a report whose every line fed the fire of rage burning in his chest. Marcus stood before the desk, his face as impassive as ever, yet his eyes betraying a flicker of concern as he watched his boss, Derek Thompson, 32 years old, auto mechanic, currently owing $50,000 in gambling debt to a loan shark ring in South Boston. Marcus read evenly. He has a documented history of domestic violence, reported by Elena Martinez 3 years ago. Hospital records show she was admitted 3 times during the marriage, once with 2 fractured ribs, once with a head injury, once with extensive bruising across her body. Dominic said nothing, but his hand tightened on the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. Isabella's face rose in his mind, his sister standing bruised and broken, tears in her eyes as she begged him not to hurt Thomas. History was repeating itself, and this time Dominic would not make the same mistake. He never cared about the child, Marcus continued, turning the page. In the 3 years since the divorce, he never contacted his daughter, never paid a single dollar in support, never visited her or sent a birthday gift. He only filed for custody after learning Lily had premium health insurance, and Elena was receiving single-parent assistance. His true motive is money, not fatherhood. Dominic rose and moved to the window, staring into the black night beyond the glass. His voice cut through the room like ice. What else? He has allied himself with Lawson, Marcus replied quietly. Our people followed him to Lawson's office yesterday. They reached some kind of agreement, and this morning Derek filed a supplemental motion accusing Elena of an inappropriate relationship and claiming she is unfit to be a mother. He also volunteered to testify in the drug theft case, saying he saw her bring medication home. Dominic turned back and Marcus instinctively stepped away from the look in his boss's eyes. He had seen Dominic angry before, had watched him order enemies erased without blinking, but never had he seen what burned now in those gray eyes. This was not cold calculation but raw fury, the wrath of a man staring at the ghost of his past made flesh again. He beat her until her bones broke, and now he wants her child for money, Dominic said slowly, each word dripping like acid. He teams up with the man who framed her to make sure she goes to prison, and he thinks he will walk away from this. Do you want me to handle him? Marcus asked, and both men understood what that meant. Dominic was silent for a long moment, and Marcus knew his boss was fighting himself. The darkness in Dominic wanted Derek dead, torn apart the way Thomas had been 10 years earlier, wanted him to suffer 1,000 times over for what he had done to Elena and Lily. But the other part of him, the part Elena had awakened that night in the storm, knew that killing Derek would only destroy her. Police would investigate, questions would be asked, the connection would be made, and Elena would become a suspect. Everything Dominic was doing to save her would turn to ash. Not yet, Dominic finally said, his voice a restrained growl. Find another way. I want him to pay, but not at the cost of harming her any further. Dig up every crime he has ever committed, every debt, every dirty deal, and send someone to see him. Just a warning. Tell him that if he does not withdraw, what comes next will be worse than death." Marcus nodded and turned to leave. But as his hand touched the door handle, Dominic's voice followed him, low and lethal. "And Marcus, if he so much as lays a finger on Elena or Lily before we finish this, I will kill him myself, slowly, painfully, without a shred of regret." 2 days later, as Elena was feeding Lily dinner in their small kitchen, everything fell apart. The old television on the shelf was playing the evening news, and she was not really listening until a name rang out and froze her in place. Dominic Rossi, the notorious Boston Mafia boss, is currently under investigation by the FBI for money laundering and extortion. The head of the Rossi family, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Northeast, has not yet issued any statement, and then his image appeared on the screen. The sharp angular face, the cold gray eyes, the slightly wavy dark hair. It was the man she had saved in the storm. It was Nick, the man who had knelt to Lily's height and patiently answered every innocent question. The man who had paid $150,000 to save her daughter's life. The spoon slipped from Elena's hand and clinked against the bowl. Her hands trembled violently, her heart racing as if it might burst from her chest. Mafia. A mafia boss. She had saved the life of a mafia boss and let her daughter sit on his lap. "Mommy, why are you shaking?" Lily looked up at her with worried eyes. "Are you cold? Should I get you a sweater?" Elena swallowed hard and forced herself to breathe. "It is okay, my love. Mommy is just tired. Finish your dinner and go to bed early tonight." That night, after Lily was asleep, Elena sat alone in the dark living room, her mind spinning with 1,000 questions. Dominic Rossi. The name echoed like an alarm bell. She had heard of the Rossi family. Everyone in Boston had. They controlled half the city, from legitimate casinos to underground operations. No one dared name aloud. And she had saved the life of their leader. He knew her name, her address, her daughter's illness, knew she had been framed. He had paid for the surgery, appeared at the hospital, looked at her with eyes she once thought were warm, but now she did not know anymore. What did he want? Why was he helping her? Was this a trap? A way to control her? To turn her into someone who owed the mafia? The next morning, Elena brought Lily to Mrs. Sarah's apartment, then took the business card Dominic had given her and called a taxi to the address printed on it. She needed answers. She needed the truth, no matter how frightening it might be. The address led her to a sleek office building in downtown Boston, the kind of place Elena had never imagined entering. She crossed the lobby, stepped into the elevator, and when the doors opened at the top floor, she saw him. Dominic stood by the window with his back to her as if he had known she would come. When he turned, his gray eyes met hers without surprise, only calm expectation. Elena stepped forward, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Who are you?" she asked clearly, guarded. "What do you want from me?" Dominic was silent for a moment, his gaze never leaving her. Then he spoke, his voice low and weary in a way she had not expected. "I am who you think I am, Dominic Rossi, a mafia boss, a monster of Boston, whatever name people choose. But I want nothing from you, Elena. Nothing at all." "Then why?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you pay for Lily's surgery? Why did you investigate me? Why did you help me?" Dominic turned and walked toward the painting on the wall, the portrait of a young woman with a radiant smile. He stood before it, and when he spoke, his voice faltered, as if he were speaking more to his own soul than to Elena. 10 years ago I had a sister. Her name was Isabella. She was 23, beautiful, full of life. She believed in love and in the goodness of people. She married a man I did not trust, but she loved him, so I did not stop her. 6 months later, he began to beat her. She begged me not to intervene, said he would change. And I listened. 3 months later, he beat her to death. Dominic turned back to Elena, and in his gray eyes she saw the abyss of 10 years of unhealed pain. "When you saved me that night, you did not ask who I was," he said slowly. "You did not ask for money. You did not run in fear. You did not calculate gain or loss. You saw someone who needed help and you helped him. It has been a very long time since anyone looked at me as a human being, Elena, and you did that without knowing who I was." Elena left Dominic's building with her thoughts tangled beyond measure, sitting in the back of a taxi on the way home, staring out the window without truly seeing anything, her mind circling endlessly around what had just happened. Dominic Rossi, a mafia boss, a killer, and also the man who had cried while speaking of his sister, who had looked at her with eyes so full of pain that her own heart had felt crushed. Was he a monster or a victim? A danger she should flee from? or the only person who was truly helping her, Elena no longer knew. In the days that followed, she wrestled constantly with herself. By day she worked, cared for Lily, prepared for the coming trial, but at night when her daughter slept, she lay awake staring into darkness until her head ached. Reason told her that Dominic was mafia, illegal, everything she should stay far away from, a man who lived in a world of blood and violence, dirty deals and enemies waiting for revenge. That if she became entangled with him, she and Lily would be pulled into that dangerous vortex, become targets, never know peace again. Yet her heart told her something else. Her heart remembered the way Dominic looked at Lily, gentle and warm as if the child were the most precious thing in the world. Remembered how he tucked Lily's clumsy drawing into his breast pocket as if it were a treasure. Remembered his voice when he spoke of Isabella, trembling with grief, not the voice of a ruthless boss, but of a brother who had carried the weight of loss for 10 years without relief. And her heart also remembered an undeniable truth. Dominic was the only person helping her. He demanded nothing, did not threaten, did not coerce. He simply acted, paid for Lily's surgery, investigated Lawson, protected her from afar without asking her to know or repay him. In 27 years of life, had anyone ever done such things for Elena? She could not remember. That afternoon when Elena picked Lily up from Mrs. Sarah's apartment, her daughter suddenly asked a question that made Elena freeze. "Mommy, is Uncle Nick a bad person?" Lily looked up at her with eyes unusually serious for her age. "I saw on TV they said he was bad, but I do not think so." Elena knelt and took her daughter's small hands in hers. "Why do you not think so?" she asked softly. "Because he smiles very kindly," Lily answered as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Bad people do not smile like that, Mommy. And he kept my drawing. I saw him put it in his pocket right over his heart. Bad people do not do that." Elena looked at her daughter and realized that sometimes children see what adults cannot, unclouded by prejudice, fear, or social labels. They simply look at a person's heart and feel the truth. "I do not know my love," Elena finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I know he is trying to do something good for us. That much I am sure of." Lily nodded as if that answer was enough, then wrapped her arms around Elena's neck and whispered, "Then, Mommy, you should trust him." Grandma said, "Kindness is never wasted." Maybe Uncle Nick has kindness too. He just hides it. Tears spilled from Elena's eyes as she held her daughter tight, and in that moment she made her decision. She would trust Dominic, not because she had no other choice, though that was true, but because she believed in what she had seen in his eyes, believed in the story of Isabella, believed in the way he treated Lily. This might be the greatest mistake of her life, or the only chance she had to escape the abyss swallowing her whole, but either way she had chosen, and she would not turn back. That night, Elena sent Dominic a message using the number on his business card. Just a single sentence carrying all the trust she had decided to give him. "I do not fully understand you, and maybe I do not need to, but I trust you. Thank you for everything you have done." Minutes later, her phone lit up with his reply. "I will not make you regret this choice." The day of the trial arrived faster than Elena had expected, as if time itself were rushing to deliver her to this moment of reckoning. That morning she woke before dawn and sat beside Lily's bed for a long while watching her sleep, then kissed her forehead and whispered a promise that she would come back. Mrs. Sarah arrived early to take Lily, and as the taxi carried Elena toward the courthouse, she felt as though she were heading into a battle she was not sure she would survive. The courtroom was packed that day. Her case had drawn the attention of local media. A nurse accused of stealing medication, a custody battle, all the elements of a public spectacle people loved to watch. Elena entered wearing the only black dress she owned, her hand gripping her purse tightly to hide her trembling. Attorney Crawford was already seated at the defense table, and when she sat beside him, he squeezed her hand and murmured that she had good friends and that they had a chance. She did not understand what he meant until the proceedings began. Derek sat across the room in an expensive gray suit, a triumphant smile on his face as if the outcome were already decided. Beside him sat his private attorney, a sharp-faced man with gold-rimmed glasses, and behind Derek, Dr. Richard Lawson appeared calm and confident, like a man holding all the cards. Elena swallowed hard, fighting the nausea of fear. The judge struck the gavel and the trial began. The hospital's lawyer stood and delivered the charges with theatrical confidence, presenting evidence Elena knew was fabricated but could not disprove. Security footage, inventory logs, emails, every piece aimed at her like poisoned arrows. Derek was called to testify and performed flawlessly, his voice heavy with feigned concern as he claimed he had seen Elena bring medication home and that he feared for his daughter's safety. Elena wanted to scream that he was lying, that he was the abuser who had nearly killed her. But Crawford placed a steadying hand on her arm. Then it was Crawford's turn. He stood, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with unsettling calm. "Your Honor, the defense has new evidence to present." The courtroom stirred. The judge called for order and allowed him to proceed. Crawford opened his briefcase and produced a thick stack of documents in a flash drive. "This is footage from a hidden camera showing Dr. Richard Lawson transferring opioid medication to a known trafficker named Tony Marconi in the hospital parking lot on the 12th of last month. The video contains clear timestamps and has been verified by digital forensic experts." Lawson leapt to his feet, his face drained of color. "That is fabricated," he shouted. "Who gave you that?" Crawford did not flinch. "Additionally, these are the authentic pharmacy accounting records proving that Dr. Lawson himself signed off on the release of the supposedly missing medication. This is his signature, not my client's, and this is a sworn statement from Nurse Jennifer Walsh, who was threatened with termination if she revealed what she knew. She is prepared to testify." The courtroom erupted. Reporters typed furiously. Spectators whispered, and Lawson stood rigid, his face flushed, eyes bulging as the evidence buried him alive. "No," he screamed, pointing at Elena. "She is the thief. She is a criminal. This is a conspiracy." "Your Honor, the defense requests the immediate arrest of Dr. Richard Lawson on charges of illegal drug distribution and defamation," Crawford said coolly. "The evidence is conclusive." The judge struck the gavel and ordered court security forward. 2 officers approached and handcuffed Lawson as he continued to shout denials, and in that chaos Elena looked at Derek and saw his expression shift from smug certainty to raw panic. His primary witness had just been arrested, his case collapsing like sand before the tide. Crawford continued as order was slowly restored. "Your Honor, the defense would also like to submit evidence regarding the custody case. These are records of domestic violence committed by the plaintiff Derek Thompson, including 3 hospital admissions of my client due to his assaults. These are records of his $50,000 gambling debt to a loan shark organization, and these documents demonstrate his true motive in seeking custody, access to health insurance benefits and child support payments, not paternal care." Derek sprang to his feet, face crimson, hands shaking. "You bastard," he screamed, and to the horror of everyone present, he lunged toward Elena, shouting that she had ruined him. Court security intercepted him before he could reach her. He thrashed and screamed like a cornered animal, completely out of control. Cuffs flashed and Derek was dragged away, still hurling threats and curses. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked down at Elena with an unreadable expression and struck the gavel one final time. Based on the newly presented evidence, the court finds the defendant, Elena Martinez, not guilty of all charges related to medication theft. The defendant is fully acquitted. Regarding the custody case, the court rules that Elena Martinez retains full legal custody of the minor Lily Martinez. The plaintiff, Derek Thompson, is permanently restrained from approaching the defendant or the child due to violent conduct in court and a documented history of domestic abuse. The sound of the gavel thundered through the room, and Elena collapsed back into her chair as tears streamed freely down her face. She had won. After all the sleepless nights, the desperate days, the moments she believed she would lose everything, she had won. Lily would stay with her. Lily would have her surgery. Lily would live. After the trial, Elena rushed out of the courthouse, her heart pounding wildly, tears still wet on her cheeks. She scanned the street looking for someone she knew would not be inside the courtroom, yet she was certain he was nearby. And she was right. Dominic stood in the shadows across the street, leaning against a sleek black car, gray eyes fixed on her. He had not entered the courthouse, had not appeared before the public, had not allowed anyone to know he was connected to the case. He simply stood there in the darkness, the same way he had quietly protected her all this time. Elena crossed the street without thinking, without hesitation. She stopped in front of him, breath unsteady, and asked in a trembling voice why he had not gone inside. Dominic looked at her, his gray eyes gentle in the way she had learned to recognize. "My world should not touch yours," he replied softly, his voice warm yet carrying a deep sadness. "You won. Elena, you and Lily are safe. That is what matters most." Elena looked at him, into eyes that were trying to hide something, into the face of the man who had pulled her back from the edge, without ever asking for anything in return, and she understood. He was planning to leave. He believed his role was over, that she no longer needed him, that she would be better off without his shadow over her life. But he was wrong. "You saved my daughter and me," Elena said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Do you really think I would let you walk away like that?" 6 months later, Spring arrived in Boston with warm winds and cherry blossoms blooming along the streets. Lily's heart surgery at Boston Children's Hospital was a success, an 8-hour operation during which Elena sat outside the operating room with Dominic beside her, his hand gripping hers every second. When the doctor emerged, smiling, and said the surgery had gone well, Elena collapsed into Dominic's arms, crying with happiness, with relief, because for the first time in many years, she no longer felt she was fighting alone. Lily recovered quickly, as if she had been born to live, to laugh, to run, and to ask a million questions each day. She called Dominic Uncle Nick at first, then Dad Nick, as naturally as if it had always been so. Dominic, the man who had once killed with his own hands, the man Boston feared, now sat on the floor playing dolls with a 5-year-old girl, patiently listening to stories of princesses and dragons. Smiling a smile Elena knew was reserved only for their small family, the love between Elena and Dominic bloomed slowly, like a flower nurtured by trust and understanding. There were no dramatic declarations, no extravagant gestures, only quiet nights after Lily slept, when they sat together speaking of the past, of pain, of scars no one could see. Dominic told her more about Isabella, about the guilt he had carried for 10 years, about the cold armor he built so no one could touch his heart again. And Elena told him about her years with Derek, about fear etched into her bones, about learning again what it meant to be loved without harm. Dominic began withdrawing from the underworld, gradually transferring control to people he trusted, building legitimate businesses, not because he was afraid, but because he had found something worth more than power or money. He had found a family, 1 year after the stormy night that changed everything. Their wedding was held in Mrs. Sarah's garden, the kind neighbor who had watched Lily through so many of Elena's late shifts. There were no hundreds of guests, no lavish rituals, only those who truly mattered. Mrs. Sarah cried with joy. Attorney Crawford smiled with quiet satisfaction. Marcus stood as best man, his expression stern, but his eyes shining with a happiness he had not felt in 10 years. And Lily, 6 years old in a white dress, served as flower girl and announced proudly to everyone that she was the matchmaker, that without her there would be no wedding, that anyone needing love should come ask her for help. Even Mrs. Sarah was next on her list. Laughter filled the garden, and Elena looked at Dominic and saw him gazing at her with gray eyes warmer than any fire. He took her hand, and she knew that at last, after all the storms, she had found her safe harbor. Sometimes the smallest choices change an entire life. Elena could have driven past that stormy night, but she did not. She stopped to save a stranger without asking who he was or what she would receive in return. And that small act of kindness opened the door to a completely new life. Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back, sometimes in ways we could never imagine. Elena's mother taught her that, and now Elena had lived to prove it true. If this story touched your heart, if you believe kindness still exists in this world, please like and share this video with those you love. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel so you do not miss more emotional stories each day. How do you feel about Elena and Dominic's story? Do you believe kindness can change destiny? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We truly look forward to hearing what is in your heart. Finally, we wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days ahead. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye and see you in the next video.